Good morning. Whether you're here in person or watching at home, it's good to be with you this morning. It's good for all of us to be together. As we gather together this morning, let me share with you words from the poet Dana Fouts. Settle in the here and now. Reach down into the center where the world is not spinning, and drink this holy peace. Feel relief flood into every cell. Nothing to do, nothing to be, but what you are already. Nothing to receive, but what flows effortlessly from mystery into form. Nothing to run from or run toward. Just this breath, awareness, knowing itself is embodiment. Just this breath, awareness, waking up to truth. Come, my friends, with our hearts open both to the challenges and to the possibilities that this new day and this new week bring. With our hearts open to all that inspires, sustains, redeems, and transforms us, come, let us worship together.
Oh, brother, sun, you bring us light, all shining round in fiery might. Oh, sister moon, you heal and bless, your beauty shines in tenderness. Oh, you sweep the hills, your mighty breath both freshens and fills. Oh, sister water, you cleanse and flow through rivers and streams in ice and snow. Oh, brother fire, you warm our night with all your dancing colored light. Oh, sister earth, you feed all things, all birds, all creatures, all scales and wings. Oh, sister death, you meet us here and take us to our God so near. Oh, God of life, we give you praise for all your creatures, for all your ways.
The flaming chalice is the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, the liberal religious tradition to which this congregation belongs. Will those of you in person please stand as you are able for the lighting of our chalice, and if you have a chalice at home, I invite you to light yours with me now. Saying together, As we kindle this flame, we recommit ourselves to the nurturing of the spirits of one another and the common good of the world we share. May the light of this flame be welcoming to all who seek a liberal religious home. For those of you already standing, I invite you to remain standing for our opening hymn, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky, which is number 301.
The earth, reach the sky, walk on shores while spirits fly, over the ocean, over the land, our faith, our quest to understand. Touch the earth, reach the sky, children ask the reasons why. In our lives the answers show, and by our love they learn and grow. Touch the earth, reach the sky, all are born and all shall die. Life's the time left in between, to follow a star, to build a dream. Touch the earth, reach the sky, hug the laughter, feel the cry. May we see where we can give, for this is what it means to live. Touch the earth, reach the sky, soar with courage ever high, spirits joining as we fly, to touch the earth, to reach the sky.
Thank you. Be seated. Thank you. I'm Sarah Ford Knorr, a member of this congregation and one of your worship associates. And if you're visiting us for the first time this morning, I'd like to offer you a really special welcome. Here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Raleigh, we are intentionally inclusive, we are liberally religious, and we are actively serving the common good of our shared world. Whoever you are and wherever you are on your own religious journey, you are welcome here. If you're visiting us for the first time in person, please stop by our welcome stand in the foyer if you haven't already done so. And if you're a return visitor, you can get a more permanent name tag at that same stand. If you're visiting us online, please fill out our visitor form there. And if you do that, you'll start receiving our weekly e-newsletter. I hope everyone will read through the chalice about all the things happening around UUFR. Our in-person social hour this morning will be downstairs in Founders Hall, and our wonderful family ministry assistant, Brittany Wilson, will be there. Today is her last day. Brittany has served our community for over a year and a half, helping bring back our child care services in the spring of 2022, and then leading one of our most popular and important family ministry programs, our Sunshine Circle, which is for our preschoolers and kindergartners. And in addition, Brittany took on important behind-the-scenes administrative work to support the overall running of our important family ministry. And we're so grateful for the warmth and the leadership and the dedication that she brought to our community. Yay. Brittany is with our kids right now, but she'll watch that and appreciate that, Jerry. She is pursuing her dream of moving to New Mexico with her daughter, and we wish her the best of luck in her new adventures. but you can say goodbye and thank you to Brittany downstairs at social hour this morning. And right now it's time to meet and greet your neighbor. This is the time of our service when we acknowledge some of the joys and sorrows of our community. And we do this because we believe that a joy shared is a joy made greater, and a sorrow shared may be made more easy to bear. Anyone is invited to email a joy or sorrow to our special email address before 9 a.m. on Sunday. And you can also light a candle, and if you wish, put a paper card to be read from the pulpit. This morning we had a card asking that we remember all people who are suffering the impacts of climate change, both in our country and around the world. As we hold that deep sorrow in our hearts and reflect on the joys, sorrows, fears, and hopes of our own lives, let's be together in stillness and silence, opening ourselves to that spirit within us and amidst us, called by many names, but known to every human heart, that leads us to a fuller, deeper, and richer experience of life. After the silence, we'll sing together, but now let's be together in stillness. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my
to me, come to me.
Everything we do at UUFR is only possible because of the generous financial support that each of us provide. If you would like to make a contribution this morning, we invite you to bring it forward and put it in one of our 3 offering plates, or you may also give using one of any of the methods that'll be up here on the screen. Thank you for your support, and please be generous. Could we take a moment to thank Tatiana and Jean Marie for their gifts of music that they're sharing with us this morning? Both Reverend James and Reverend Sasha are away from UUFR this morning, and I am honored to introduce our guest speaker, the Reverend Teshin Sweger. Reverend Sweger is the director of the North Carolina Zen Center, which is a Buddhist community in Pittsboro that I hope you, like I, have had the privilege of visiting. He has been a student of Zen Buddhism for 30 years, and he received Dharma Transmission, which means permission to teach, in 2016. Reverend Sweger is also a psychotherapist in private practice, and he lives with his daughter, Arriyah, and his wife, Dana. And yes, that's our Dana, who serves as UUFR's Director of Family Ministry in Pittsboro. Please give the Reverend Teshin Sweger a warm welcome to UUFR.
Good morning. It's an honor to be with you this morning. Thank you for the invitation. I've never actually given a talk at a pulpit like this. Usually I'm sitting on the floor. Actually, the other day, Dana asked me, "How is your sermon coming?" And I think she even threw in the word preaching. And so that made me think of the words of Zen Master Ikkyu, who said, "Every day, priests expound the sutras and complicated sermons. Before doing that, they should learn to read the love letters sent by the wind and the rain, the snow and the moon." So I want to share some words aside from Ikkyu. I want to share some words from a person who in Zen circles is very well known, but outside of Zen circles is not so well known. It was actually described in an article on NPR as the greatest philosopher that you've never heard of. His name was Eihei Dogen. He was a 13th century Japanese Zen teacher and the founder of the Soto School of Zen in Japan. His life story is quite compelling to me. His father was an aristocrat. His mother was really unknown who exactly she was. His father died quite early, and his mother died at the age of 7. And at her funeral, the young Dogen sat quietly watching the incense smoke rise from the stick in the incense burner. And as it danced and faded away, in that moment, we're told that he came to understand impermanence, a core teaching of the Buddha. It was in that moment that the young boy said that he wanted to become a monastic and study the teachings of the Buddha. And at the age of 12, he entered monastic life as a Tendai Buddhist. That didn't last too long because we're told that Dogen's questioning was strong. His spirit of questioning the nature of life and death was a bit much for the Tendai priest. And so he sent young Dogen to study with a Zen master. Faith is an important part of Zen Buddhism, but more than faith, I would say that Zen is a doubt tradition. At the center of Zen practice is questioning who we are. What does it mean to be a human being in this world? And these questions so often fade to the background for so many of us, replaced with easy answers, with busyness, with the need to know or to be in the know. But Zen masters love to throw us back on our questions. In fact, we even ask, who is it that is asking that question? So for Dogen, his questioning led him to China, where he studied under a well-known Zen master and eventually resolved those deep questions of his. And then he returned to Japan and studied, taught, and practiced until he died at the age of 53. And to many, his writing is both beautiful, but also baffling. His use of language and creative use of language has been compared to the writing or the music of great jazz musicians like Miles Davis, who bent and remade the standards of the day, or to Picasso, who still elicits the occasional, "I don't get it." Reading Dogen is like reading poetry, letting the words come and go without struggling so much to make sense of them. And so this short passage is from his masterwork called the Shobo Genzo, from an essay called Genjo Koan. He said, "To study the Buddha way is to study ourself. To study ourself is to forget ourself. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the mind and bodies of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. When you first seek the Dharma, you imagine that you are far away from it. At that moment, when Dharma is correctly transmitted, you are immediately your original self. Enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not divide you. Just as the moon does not break the water, you cannot hinder enlightenment. Just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon in the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection, however long or short in its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop and realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. Thank you.
Be lambs unto yourselves, be your own confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves as to the only Lamb.
So usually in a Zen talk, we begin with a story of sorts. And I want to start this morning with a well-known Zen tale. It happened maybe about 150 years ago in Japan. A student came to learn Zen from a Zen teacher, and as was the custom of the time, he was introduced into the temple and sat down for some tea. If you've ever been to a traditional tea ceremony, you know it's very carefully done. very slow, methodic. And in this case, the master took out the tea powder, poured the hot water, whisking the green tea into a froth, and then poured it into the student's cup. And as the master was pouring, the cup filled up, but he kept pouring and pouring. Now, being a good Japanese student, he remained quiet and watched as the tea began to run over the cup and onto the table, and the master kept pouring. As much as he tried, the student couldn't take it anymore and burst out saying, "Master, can't you see? The cup is full. No more will go in." The master stopped pouring and looked at the student, and he said, "Your mind is like this cup, full of ideas, opinions, and judgments. How can I teach you anything when your mind is already filled?" To be open is not an easy thing, but I invite you to give it a try this morning. I want to share a bit about the Buddha's teaching, about his life. This ordinary person, Siddhartha Gautama, who lived some 2,600 years ago in northern India. By the way, he was just a man. He was not a god. In fact, in Buddhism, there is no God concept. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the basic teachings of Buddhism. In fact, maybe some of you actually are practicing Buddhists. As an interesting aside, when we hear the word Buddhism, we have to be careful. That was a British term. Everything became an ism, right? We love isms in our culture. But in the Buddha's time and afterwards, it was simply called the Dharma. And the Dharma means the way. We could ask, the way of what? Well, the Buddha said he was interested in the way of reality. He recognized through his own experience that much of the reason that we suffer, the reason we're so dissatisfied, the reason that we have difficulty in this life, is that we're out of touch with reality. What gets in the way of seeing and experiencing things as they are? The Buddha said that while, yes, the world out there can be a very painful place with all its uncertainties and dangers, what makes humans suffer is actually how we relate to the conditions that are in front of us. The ways that we think about our lives, ourselves, about others, how much time we spend pining after another place or another time, either wanting for the future or longing for the past. Even when we're in the moment, drinking that oh so perfect cup of coffee or tea, or enjoying that delicious piece of cake, even then, very often, our minds are divided, thinking about something else. Not only do our minds drift from thing to thing, our thoughts are so crowded with opinions and judgments that do distort reality, like filters in front of a camera. This is what the Buddha called dukkha, a Sanskrit word, sometimes translated as suffering. Perhaps it's not the best choice of translations, because dukkha is often much more subtle than the world suffering. The word dukkha, the Buddha said, was referred to an image like a wheel on a cart. He said, it's like a wheel that is out of balance or bent. Sure, it turns, it does its job, but it turns with a thump. Like the wheel, we get up every morning, we do our jobs, we live our lives, and yet there's some feeling that we have that this isn't all that there should be. There's got to be something else to this life. There has to be a smoother way, a less bumpy way. Most of us feel that. In fact, I've yet to meet a person who hasn't felt that at times. And when we do feel that, we look for solutions. Work-life balance, self-care, family, vacation, community, church, a new car. We go looking out there. And as important as these things can be, the Buddha and all of the Buddhist and Zen masters have recognized that nothing will fill that lack. Nothing out there. The very notion that something out there will do it is the problem. We're told that the Buddha himself tried everything. Of course, he was born into a privileged life, but even after relinquishing that, he still couldn't find peace. He took up, we're told, every spiritual tradition he could find, meditation and yoga. But each time he went into a meditative state, attaining bliss or peace or equanimity, he ended up right back where he started. Those states of mind were temporary. So he pushed harder. He took up ascetic practices. He tried to transcend his body by denying its most basic needs of food, shelter, and any comfort. But in the end, that too failed. He couldn't escape himself. Years ago, I was watching Saturday Night Live, and a skit featured a New York travel agent, played by Adam Sandler, who boasted of providing beautiful tours to Italy through his tour company. However, he said, that now and then people will leave a bad review about their experience. And he said he wanted to temper expectations. And he reminded the audience that if you don't like hiking now, you probably won't like hiking when you're in Italy. And he goes on, tempering people's expectations, ultimately cautioning, remember, you still are going to be you on vacation. And this is the fundamental problem. We change our circumstances, we can change what we do, we can arrange and rearrange all the pieces on the chessboard of our lives, and yet fundamentally, that will only prolong the dis-ease. When the Buddha recognized this, he took nourishment, eventually healing his neglected body. He sat down under the now famous ficus tree, sometimes called the Bodhi tree, crossed his legs in the formal meditation posture, and became determined not to move until he attained peace, real peace. He had become disenchanted with moving the pieces around and looking outside of himself. So he turned inward. As he did for days, we're told he was besieged by all manner of self-doubt, temptations, and thoughts of giving up. And one by one, he put those aside until finally his struggle abated. He entered into what we call samadhi, one-pointed concentration. Then on the morning of the 8th day, spontaneously, he looked up into the sky and saw Venus, the morning star, shining. And at that moment, he attained perfect peace. In Buddhism, what is called Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, supreme complete enlightenment. Now, the question can come up, what did he realize? What was he enlightened to? Well, here I want to offer a preface, a caution. Words ultimately fail. They fall short. And this is where Zen comes in. Bodhidharma, who was a 5th century Indian monk who brought Zen to China, warned, Zen is a transmission that is outside of Scripture. It is not dependent on words. Instead, it is a tradition that points directly to the human mind and heart. In our own Western tradition, the psychoanalyst Frida Fromm-Reichmann said that her patients were in need of an experience, not an explanation. Words, descriptions, philosophy can never touch it. There are whole libraries, of course, that are filled with philosophy. As my teacher used to say, if we could have figured it out through philosophy, we would have already done so. There are thousands of Dharma talks and sermons available on YouTube. By reading and listening, we can get some measure of peace, but it will never be a substitute for direct experience. In Zen, we say it's like a finger pointing at the moon. Don't mistake the finger for the moon. This is why traditionally, if you wanted to learn about Zen in China or Japan, they would show you how to cross your legs, how to focus on your breathing, but no other explanations were offered. The rest was up to you. And yet, words are pointers, and most of us need a pointer or two. So back to the question of what the Buddha realized. At that decisive moment under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha, his mind was open. It emptied. And as he glanced up and saw the morning star, suddenly his sense of self completely vanished. Suddenly there was no distance, no difference between him and Venus. There was just star. Not only was he the star, but he was all beings, and all beings were him. It is purported that at that moment, of course nobody was there to witness it, so it was purported that he said, I and all beings simultaneously attain the way. In other words, he came to see that all of his suffering, as well as the suffering of all beings, all people, was caused by a false sense of separation. We experience ourselves as separate in so many ways. As someone once said, alone and afraid in a world I never made. And our sense of separation is not only what causes our personal pain, but it is what causes so much of the conflict in our world. And yet, that experience of non-separation that the Buddha had is available to all of us without exception. It's not an idea. It's not just a bumper sticker or something that we need to believe, although we might start with belief. It's not a creed. It's not a philosophy. Beliefs, ideas, and yes, even those closely held identities, as helpful as they can also be an impediment to understanding ourselves more deeply. In fact, the Buddha said, "Don't believe what I say just out of respect for me. Rather, test it in the fire of your own experience." And time again, this is what practitioners of the Dharma have done. They have confirmed it for themselves. Going back to Dogen from the reading today, when he described his own enlightenment experience, he said, "I came to realize clearly that mind is no other than mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars." A Chinese poet named Li Bai had a similar experience and summed it up saying, "We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains." These kind of experiences, whether profound or subtle, are available to each one of us. That is, when our minds are quiet, not so caught up in the project of me. One of my teachers, who is also a UU minister, says that we have to learn to sit down and shut up. Zen can be very direct. Another teacher called the process of quieting opening the hand of thought. We clench that hand so tightly. Letting go of thought over and over again, our minds can become quiet, receptive, open to something greater than the self-project. And when that happens, our natural qualities of wisdom and compassion show up. So many of the stories in Zen point to the importance of letting go of our ideas, even profound spiritual ideas. One of my favorite stories is centered on a student named Fayan, who lived in the Tang era in China. He was on pilgrimage with a few of his friends, which was the custom at the time, visiting various monasteries and teachers, religious sites. And according to the story, they spent the night at a monastery run by a teacher named Daizang. Late that night, Daizang overheard the group of pilgrims talking about Zen philosophy. In the morning, Daizang saw them to the temple gate to say goodbye, and he said, "I heard you all talking last night about the nature of Zen and the nature of mind, how everything is in fact our mind." Then he pointed to a large stone that was nearby on the ground, and he asked, "If that's the case, would you say that that rock is inside your mind or outside of your mind?" Fayan, the student, immediately said, "Inside." To that, Daizang said, "You poor pilgrim, to carry a heavy rock around like that in your mind is not going to be easy." At that, Fayan was dumbfounded, and he put down his bags, and he said, "Clearly, I have more to understand." And he ended up practicing there with Daizang for a time. During that time, He would regularly meet with Daizong and present his understanding of Zen, and every time Daizong would say, "The Dharma is not like that." He meditated and meditated and tried, until finally, one day, he went in to meet with the master and he said, "I've run out of words and ideas." At that, his teacher said, "If you want to understand Buddha, understand that everything you see is it." And at that, Fayan experienced awakening. When we run out of words and ideas and opinions and judgments, we have an opportunity to get out of our heads and experience the world as it is. In the same spirit, another one of my teachers said, "A good spiritual book is one that inspires you to close it, to put it down, and to practice." What he meant by practice was, of course, meditation. But we could easily just say, put it down and live. In our tradition, the central practice is the simple yet penetrating practice of silent sitting. So if you're one of those who have read and discussed and listened to the inspiring words of philosophers and psychologists, self-help experts and preachers, and yet still feel like there's something missing, you're not alone. There is a path forward, and that is through experience, not more explanation. The Zen way is to begin with daily periods of silence, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and more over time. We sit in a comfortable upright position, we lower our gaze, and we regulate our breathing. And as thoughts arise, we notice them, and without hesitation, we let them go. No easy task. Of course, we also get sleepy, we get distracted, we get impatient or bored. Sometimes we feel pain or discomfort, and we practice being with all of that. Simple yet profoundly challenging. As time goes on, we become more settled in our bodies, and we find that we can tolerate being with difficulty without the need to change anything. We're learning to meet the world as it is, and that is truly a spiritual gift. Our capacity increases, and we sit for longer periods. We might try a day-long period of silence, or a weekend, or perhaps even a week-long retreat. We begin to have times when our self-narrative, the story of me, gets kind of thin. And as it does, there's great relief. These moments are fertile ground. But even short of an awakening experience like the masters of the Buddha, Zen practice is just about closing that distance, the distance between ourselves and our lives as they are. Through regular Zen practice, we learn that when we throw ourselves into our lives fully, whether that's cleaning the dishes, taking the kids to school, having a difficult conversation, or simply breathing, we find that our difficulties diminish and we're more present and available for others. We suffer less when we don't stand on the sidelines, judging, analyzing, complaining, separating ourselves from where we are and who we're with. And that is the point. To reduce suffering for ourselves and others, and to enjoy this short time we have in this world together. So returning to the story that I started with today, when we empty our teacups, when we take time each day in silence, the world can come in. Again, as Master Dogen said, as I read during the reading, to study Zen is to study ourself. To study ourself is to forget ourself. To forget ourself is to be enlightened by myriad things. Nothing gets left out. And so I want to end this morning with a poem from a master in a different Buddhist tradition, from the forest tradition. It's called A Still Forest Pool. He says, "Try to be mindful and let things take their course. Then your mind will become still in all surroundings, like a still forest pool. All kinds of wonderful animals will come to drink at the pool, and you will clearly see the nature of all things. You will see many strange and wonderful things come and go, but you will be still. This is the happiness of the awakened one." Thank you.
Thank you, Teshin. Please stand as you are able for our closing hymn, number 391, Voice Still and Small.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, all through the years, singing.
Please be seated. As we end this time of worship together, may we do so with ever more love for one another, with ever more gratitude for this precious gift of life that we share this very day, with ever more peace in our hearts, and with ever more hope for our own lives and for this world we share. Amen.